Spare a little change, please. Spare a little change, please. Spare a little change, please.
How often do you walk past a homeless person in the
Spare a little
street?
change, please.
Do you find yourself wondering how they got there? If they're okay?
Oh, thank you so
Or do you not
much.
really see
Thank
them
you.
at all? On this podcast, we're going to tell you about Ian Harrison, how he ended up rough sleeping as a teenager, how he's still on the streets after 17 years, and what his life's like day to day. And a warning, this won't be easy listening for everyone.
You just want a job in a normal life, but it's hard to get. People don't want you to have that. When you get it, they tell you they want you to have that, but as soon as you get it, then they don't.
The government's pledge to end rough sleeping by the end of this parliament, which will be sometime next year, simply won't be met. That is the damning verdict from the Kerslake Commission, which was established to tackle this very issue. In fact, the number of people sleeping on the streets is on the rise for the first time in 5 years. What's going wrong? I'm Sally Lockwood, and this is the Sky News Daily. Later, we'll be speaking to the CEO of St Mungo's homeless charity about the broader issue. But first, I'm with Sky News producer Sarah O'Connell, who's known Ian Harrison for 17 years. And in that time, he's been in and out of prison and on and off the streets. Right now, he's back rough sleeping in the same circumstances you met him, Sarah, all those years ago.
So I first met Ian when he was about 16 years old. I was researching a film on teenagers that had addictions to drugs. He was living in a hostel at the time, which was a drugs hostel, and then quite soon after he went onto the street. The first day I ever met Ian, he had a £1 coin on him, and he went into the local shop and bought 2 50p bags of penny sweets, came out, gave me one. Absolutely won my heart, really. Stayed with him ever since. And what I've seen of his life, well, I feel that he's in exactly the same place that I found him 16, 17 years ago. Dual injecting, crack cocaine and heroin, homeless, on the streets. And I've seen Ian, I feel he goes through cycles where he'll be temporarily housed in a hostel. I've seen him housed in permanent accommodation in council flats, but he inevitably loses those flats because he ends up, quite often he'll get what we would call cuckooed, which is he's vulnerable, and local dealers in the area that he's living in will see that and they'll move into his flat and they'll start running drugs lines from his flat, and there's nothing Ian can do about that.
So would you say that Ian's circumstances are different from someone else who might be rough sleeping because of his drug issues, or is this all quite typical?
I think Ian's absolutely typical of the majority of people that you'll see on the streets. I don't know the stats, and I'm quite sure nobody knows the stats, but I would guess at least 70-80% of the people I meet who are sleeping rough have got addictions to Class A drugs, crack and heroin.
Homelessness is different to rough sleeping.
Yeah.
If you're living in temporary accommodation and you don't have your own home, you're classified as homelessness. But what we're talking about when it comes to Ian is rough sleeping.
Yeah, he sleeps on the streets.
How many hostels are available for people like him? You know, could he not be sleeping underneath Hammersmith flyover if he wanted to?
10 years ago, if you'd asked me this question, I would have said that the availability was good. Now, it seems to be a lot more difficult for Ian to get into a hostel than it used to be. And the problem with the Ians of this world is that if someone doesn't actively go out to speak to them, he's not in any state to go and seek hostel accommodation. So if someone doesn't find him, he's going to stay there forever.
It was just a few weeks ago I was speaking to someone on the street who needed money. They told me they needed something like £18 for their hostel for the night. Mm. So for someone like Ian, if he does want to sleep in a hostel, does he have to pay for it?
No, not always. I think when you were approached, that would be what I would call a temporary night shelter, which often you do have to pay a small sum, but they're not hostels. It's a night shelter. When Ian is placed into hostels, the council pay for Ian's accommodation.
For our listeners, let's paint a picture of Ian. How old is he? And where does he sleep at the moment while he's rough sleeping? And what's his day-to-day life like?
Well, he's 33 and he's currently sleeping under the flyover in Hammersmith, which, as I'm sure you know, is 4 or 5 lanes of traffic thundering above his head. He's got a few cardboard boxes that he uses to keep the rain and the wind off him. His day consists of finding drugs, finding money and finding drugs. He doesn't, I mean, his addiction is crack cocaine and heroin, which heroin has a physical effect if you don't take heroin. So I know lots of people are like, oh, he's just a heroin addict, he should stay off heroin. It's not really that easy once you're on heroin without any help and support. His entire focus is finding money to buy drugs. If he doesn't take heroin now, he has severe physical side effects, a lot of pain. It's like he's got a really, really severe flu. I found him in the fetal position many a time, just curled up. He won't have spoken nor seen anyone.
I remember filming with some rough sleepers a few years ago, and they told me that they didn't feel safe in hostels. They'd prefer to be on the street. And then I also spoke to a council who said, well, we've got hostels available for these people. If they're sleeping on the street, it's because they're choosing to. What would you say to that?
I've been in every hostel Ian's ever stayed in. Quite often they tend to put him in hostels specifically designed, they would say, for addicts, for drug addicts. Never mind Ian not feeling safe in it. I don't feel safe in them. They're very desolate places. Again, he doesn't get any support. If you walk out the front door, there'll be so many dealers, drug dealers, because obviously they know where their customers are, that they're all in one house or one building.
But some might say, well, surely a bed that's dry and warm is preferable over sleeping under Hammersmith flyover.
It is preferable, but if that's all you're giving him, then what's the point? Because if you just give him a bed, his life's not going to change, because the drugs are going to take him back out there. Ian needs constant support. He needs consistency.
Something that I found really striking in the report that you made was when Ian said, all I want is a job and a normal life. And I thought to myself, that's really not that much to ask, is it?
No.
How hard is that for someone in his position to achieve?
Almost impossible. On his own, totally impossible. Ian, when he's been put into a flat, he can't manage money. He doesn't know how to pay bills. He was in a children's home, and he was a child from care. He has no concept of things that we take for granted that we probably understand how to do when we're 16. He needs consistent support from the same team of people. Ian can't sort his life out on his own. It's impossible.
And the tragic statistic is that the average rough sleeper will die in their 40s. And Ian's, 33? What does the future hold for Ian at the moment as you see it, or as he sees it?
I honestly, I try to have hope, because I've known him so long and I've tried so hard to help him. And you would think that someone with my means, a journalist, who knows the way to go about things, would have been able to help him. Can't do it on my own. If Ian doesn't contact me, he rings me every week. If I don't hear from him for a couple of weeks, I think he's dead. I think who's going to call me? Who's going to tell me that he's dead? Who knows that I even know him? I'm going to keep trying, aren't I? Because what else can I do? But I'm not optimistic. But, I hope that he gets on methadone, can get some housing and find some... Well, he's clever. The worst thing about all this is Ian is clever and kind, and he deserves so much more. He's never had therapy. He's a victim of abuse when he was a child. He's never had therapy. And I've heard doctors say to him, there's no therapist available, you've got a 2-year waiting list. And one of Ian's problems is he's lonely. It sounds ridiculous, but he's lonely. He doesn't have anyone looking out for him or looking after him. He needs a team of people around him.
Okay, Sarah, I hope we revisit this story in the future
I
and
hope
have
so too.
something brighter to talk about.
I hope so too.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Let's pause there. After the break, we'll hear from Emma Haddad, CEO of the homeless charity St Mungo's, the Secretariat of the Kerslake Commission.
Hi, thank you for calling Streetlink. Streetlink helps connect people who are sleeping rough to local services to support them. Calls to this number are charged that they're often very busy, and it is likely that it may take some time before a member of the team can answer your...
Even if not taking drugs, yeah, people are taking drugs because then they're on medication. Like the doctors and stuff say, oh, take this medication. It's a drug. They're telling you to take it because this will help you. It's just that these drugs, they say don't help you when they do help some people. Every drug has a purpose, right? And if it's taken in the right situation, then it's good for you. And if you take anything, even if you breathe oxygen too much, it's bad for you. So any drug that you take, if you take it too much, it's bad.
I'm joined now by Emma Haddad, who's CEO of St Mungo's homeless charity. Just begin by outlining the scale of the problem at the moment when it comes to rough sleeping in particular, up so much in the last year for the first time since 2017. What's going on?
Traditionally, we see people who've got very complex needs, often a history of trauma, mental health issues, and they've fallen out of the system for a long time, entrenched needs, often rough sleeping for quite some time. But at the same time, we're also seeing people who haven't got that long history of trauma and complex needs. In fact, they're probably still in work, a lot of them, but with the cost of living crisis and increased costs and inflation going up, they've simply been unable to hold down a roof over their head, and they've lost their tenancy and found themselves homeless, either sofa surfing or staying with friends, or sadly, at the sharp end, even rough sleeping on the streets.
Now, during the pandemic, a lot of progress was made when it came to improving the numbers of people rough sleeping. What's gone wrong since?
The Kerslake Commission was established precisely in response to everyone in the campaign during the pandemic to try and learn the lessons from the pandemic response and to hold on to what worked really, really well. Everybody was offered the same help off the streets. Sadly, you can hold on to a shared mission and a shared purpose, but we've lost that specific funding for everybody. And we've lost that shared mandate, really, from central government, which said everybody has to be off the streets. This is a health emergency. We need to get people safe and inside. And without that, it's harder and harder to help.
Now, the Conservative manifesto at the last election was to end rough sleeping within the lifespan of this Parliament. The Kerslake Commission has concluded that this goal will not be met by the deadline, which will be sometime next year. What's your take on how well the Conservative government has done in tackling this issue?
Well, it was fantastic to hear the Housing Minister this morning say that she still felt that the government would reach their 2024 target of ending rough sleeping. But to all of us in the sector, where there's a wealth of expertise and experience, and we're seeing clients every day in our services, it looks way beyond reach to all of us. One of the biggest things that the government has unfortunately failed to do so far is raise housing benefit. And you've got housing benefit, which has been frozen since 2019, nearly 5 years, while rents have just continued to rise and rise. And so the gap between what people can afford and what they're actually getting in housing benefit has become bigger and bigger, and more people are therefore finding themselves homeless.
What has gone wrong here? Why are we seeing homelessness at a 25-year high in England?
I think this is why there's this sense of outrage that comes through the Kerslake Commission report. Homelessness shouldn't exist in 21st century Britain. And we're comparing it to what was felt at the turn of the 20th century in England, with this huge level of poverty that led to the founding of the welfare state. It really is on a similar scale. And there's been this lack of investment in housing. We've seen statutory services just brought to their knees with not enough funding poured in. There is the will in local government. We work very closely with local authorities. We deliver services on their behalf. But we're fighting against the tide, as in the title of the report published today, where we're just meeting people who have reached that crisis point rather than preventing them from getting to the crisis in the first place. And if we're really going to change that situation and start to get a lid on homelessness, to stop rough sleeping continuing to go through the roof, we're going to have to reorientate that system.
Research by the homeless charity St Barnabas found that 82% of people wouldn't know what to do if someone they knew was homeless. What could individuals do to help someone?
People do find it really hard to know what to do, especially when you meet somebody on the street. Should you give them money? Should you not? I mean, just saying hello is really, really nice, and not just walking on by and ignoring people. You can phone StreetLink. StreetLink is a service. I think you covered it on your coverage earlier on today.
Yeah,
about
but it's
Ian,
a 1 hour wait just to make a phone call.
which was really sad to hear.
Not every homeless person has a mobile phone. And if
No.
they do, they don't necessarily have the credit on it to make a phone call where they could be on hold for an hour.
No, and that's why it's open to members of the public, and there's a digital channel too, so you can message in and you can say that you've seen somebody who needs help, and then StreetLink will go out and get in touch with them. And an hour sounds an incredibly long time, and I was really sorry to hear that. But, this is a sign of the growing demand.
And just lastly, Emma, how hopeful are you that the rising number of homeless and rough sleepers could be turned around?
So I am going to remain really hopeful. I want to remain hopeful. The Kerslake Commission was established at a time of high energy and high optimism because of what we'd achieved and what we saw could be achieved during the pandemic, which was amazing. We've got to bottle that energy. We've got to bottle that way of working and not lose sight of it completely, because that's what we're in danger of. But I truly believe that we can build on that, we can hold on to it, and that coming together with that right sense of shared purpose and the right funding in the right places, not just trying to stick over the cracks, but actually prevent homelessness in the first place, we really can. And we need to hold on to that so that we can actually end rough sleeping for good.
OK, Emma Haddad, CEO of St Mungo's, thanks very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
The government's responded to the Kerslake Commission's report, saying it is focused on ending rough sleeping for good, spending £2 billion to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping in the areas that need it most. They also said significant progress has been made, with over 640,000 households prevented from becoming homeless or supported into settled accommodation since 2018. That's all for this episode of the Sky News Daily. You can watch more on this on the Sky News website and on our YouTube channel.